we will make up time, I hope. Don't laugh, Claire. Look, it's great to be here and on a good day in Southland. It's always a good day. I can sort of check we are live streaming now. Brilliant. So welcome to those either in the public gallery or to those that are also joining in by way of live streaming. Welcome to our meeting. Getting close to key time in the year for us all, particularly as we try and move and wrap up towards annual reporting, although that's got some way to go and there's more on that. We have the agenda in front of us, and I'd just like to start with it appropriately, which is firstly to record, are there any apologies? I received one this morning from Alex. And in a reflection to reflect her problem, I think as a young mum, she finds these starts early, and she has said to me, Bruce, I hope you might fix that. I don't know, it's not my call. The council might fix that in terms of the new tronium in terms of timing, but I'll pass it on what it's worth. We have Alex's apology.
And
Rebecca.
I have to pop away for half an hour at 9:30.
And you have to pop, sorry, Ed?
9:30.
9:30, thank you. I thought you said 1:30, and I thought perhaps I should be trying to finish before 1:30, Rebecca, so that's fine. Are there any other apologies that we need to sustain? There being none, I'll put the motion that we sustain those apologies. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Rangi. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any matters in front of this in terms of business that we need to raise or declare matters of interest? I'd like to raise that I do, and I'd like to give just a wee bit more expansion on that when we get to PX. But there is item 7 in the PX part of our agenda, for which there's a risk that I could be perceived to have a position of bias. So I've arranged with Ross that when we deal with that I ask Ross to take the chair as I leave the chamber for that item, but I can explain more when we get to PX. Thank you very much. Right, I haven't been informed of anybody wishing from the public to speak at this stage. So if we could turn our look to the agenda. It's in front of you. I, at this stage, haven't been informed of urgent business, and obviously we have the public excluded session. So at this stage, I propose that we truck on through a normal fashion through the agenda as it is set down. Right, could we move to the first item, please, which is the minutes for the last meeting on the 12th of June. I would like to move from the chair that we accept these minutes as they're confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Nobby. Is there any discussion, matters of correction or the likes that we should record at this stage? Look pretty good to me, and I think if there's any action points, they do come up in the rest of the agenda. So from this position, I'll move that motion, seconded by Nobby. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, working together. We're risk update report. Michael, welcome to the table. Good to see you, sir. Very keen to hear your thoughts.
Yep. Morena, everybody. Thank you. Yes, it's the first update post the end of the Working Together official program. However, as noted, there are a number of risks that remained live. So this is the first report to cover those off. There are 4 risks detailed in the body of the report. Most of those do come to an end with the coming of the elections. However, the appendix, sets out a number of ongoing projects that we have as a consequence of this program, and just provides a simple update on where all of those are at, and that they are still in the thoughts of staff as we progress. So with the interest of a full agenda, I will leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for helping me with my agenda, Michael. That's superb. Do we have questions for Michael at this stage, please? Yes, Councillor Pottinger.
Looking at the table there, I see one thing that's
which table, please?
the future reporting against outcomes.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that's page 3, 4, 5, 6 of the agenda. Right.
Yeah, it just
Oh,
talks.
no,
about,
20, sorry.
Yeah, it just talks about governance and induction and training and everything. And one thing that has been brought up over the last while is the effectiveness, usefulness, and relevance of our code of conduct. Now, obviously, you can understand why the code of conduct's there, but it's sort of transpired. The DIA's view on this, and this is my take on it, is that the use of the code of conduct is actually sort of taboo, and you're going down, that's not very nice, even though you can see why it's there for a reason. You look at all the different aspects of it. So I'm just wondering where we sit in that moving forward, because we either have it and use it, or we get rid of it because it seems to get us into trouble.
Yeah. So a code of conduct is a required document. You must have one,
Mm.
and you can generally most councils will set it at the start of the triennium term, and that will be the code of conduct set in stone. That being said, I'm also aware that Environment Southland, I saw in the media today, are reviewing their code of conduct. So it is in process at the moment. We are reviewing it so that we can take a new code of conduct through to the incoming council. There will be some proposed changes. My team have been looking at a number of different code of conducts from different councils, and it's been quite interesting, the differences in the different mechanisms that can be used rather than the relatively blunt instrument that ours currently is. So it is in progress as part of the induction work.
Just doing a bit of online reading last night, I see that Hutt City actually imposed a monetary fine on one of their members using the code of conduct. Now that they were completely outside it, but this is the type of thing I'm just wondering. It goes further. Is this something that local government or central government are looking at, or is it just up to each council to realise?
So it is up to each council, but I am also aware that LGNZ has done some work on codes of conduct for local authorities, and the minister has politely asked them to hold off on any further work until such time as the Future for Local Government has been, that report has been presented. So it is something that both the minister and LGNZ are aware of, and that there are some deficiencies in the code of conduct process, but at the moment it is up to each council on how they adopt it and basically how big a stick they want the code of conduct to wield.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Darren, I think you're next, and then Nobby.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've been using a template from LGNZ in recent years, and it's reassuring to know that it is being looked at, because in some senses accountability is left wanting. But I think, to pick up on the point that Councillor Pottinger made about the DIA, their concern was not the code of conduct itself, but more often in our case how often it was being used. And I guess while it's there as a tool that's available, the point that they made through the working together process was to make sure it wasn't overused.
Thank you, Darren. Nobby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's my understanding that there's a local government commission that's looking into this. I've had some input into that. I guess other councils may have as well. They're looking at the relevance of codes of conduct, how they are investigated, because from their perspective there was a lack of consistency. Each council just sort of identifies somebody that might do it, the cost involved, and also the issue of are codes of conduct being used to put pressure on, I guess, councillors that are a little bit out of line. And so I don't know where that report's gone to, but I assume it would go back to DIA or back to the minister. But it was part of an overall look at Local Government Act, and it's independent as well.
Thanks, Nobby. The Local Government Commission report is available on their website.
Yep. Okay.
And it does, as you're quite rightly pointed out, give rise to a substantial overhaul.
Sure.
I've always, for what's worth, I hate to say it, but I do a number of them. If I could just add a wee bit to the question you raised, Ian. One is it was always accepted when we first reviewed these, that the Office Auditor General did, that the value is a bit like the work you've done on your good work you've done on your charter. It's actually agreeing up front what are the values that you mutually want to subscribe to as a chamber and as members of that chamber. That's the critical part. It's often overlooked, by the way, when you come to induction, Michael. There's a bit of advice. Spend a bit of time, more than the normal 90 seconds. The challenging part is actually the investigation. And that is the local government New Zealand template, from a personal perspective, has its challenges to the point that we are exactly where you said, where it needs to be done. I'd want to reflect on two things. The fourth risk that is still there is complacency. And I wanted to make a comment on that one, if I could, Michael, which is right, it's in the risk register. But actually, I think that's the biggest challenge for us, is that we feel we have got through working together, and yet we forget the good work that was done to look at the behaviour that should occur inside the chamber and how we make good, useful decisions for our community. And the code is part of that, by the way. But I think we have, and are all wanting to subscribe to the higher core, which is the charter. I would just want to reflect on that. So you're quite right. Codes are still there, as far as I know. They'll still be part of the induction work that you'll have to do when it comes to post 8 October. And Darren, you're right. Only if you're pulling it down, actually it's too late. If you're pulling it off the shelf to use it, it's too late. There's something else should have happened prior. That's the best advice I could give you. Any other questions for Michael in terms of the paper? I wonder if I could just check a couple of things again. I'm thinking putting this back to the table, and I just was wanting to check two things. You've answered the first one, which is induction clearly is big on the mind of the council. You're thinking through the processes that sit behind working together, which is really superb. I'm just wanting to know a wee bit around some of the monitoring that is to occur, has occurred or will occur under this framework. And there's one that's due, I think, for reporting in September next month. Are you able to give an indication that that presumably must be in train now? So if I'm looking at it, it is, where are we? For instance, on page 20, under the top of the page is a quarterly internal quality assurance check, first report due in 30 September 22. And it occurs that's in hand, is it?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Right. Are there any other questions then for Michael that people would like to raise? There aren't. Can we move to the recommendations, please, which is that we receive the report. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that. I'll put the motion. Or is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Radio, thank you for that, Michael. I suspect we'll get you back later, so I appreciate your presence this morning. Right, the performance report for the fourth quarter, and there are only 4 quarters in the year, so we are getting close to balance time. And it's a good chance for us to reflect with or without elections coming up. Brandon, welcome to the meeting. Very keen to hear what you'd like to point out for us, please.
So obviously this is the fourth quarter performance report. There is still some work ongoing before the annual report provides the final picture, but I think this provides a good picture of where we're at in terms of the previous year. So this report provides you with the report that went to the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee, while drawing out a few points of note for this committee. So I think the first thing that I'll just note is that while Council delivered 68% of the capital programme, it was the largest capital programme ever delivered by this council, and that is a big achievement. This report also outlines some of the work that is ongoing and was reported to this last committee meeting around the performance framework improvements. So that work is ongoing and on schedule, and that will enable management to keep a more regular kind of update and overview of all aspects of performance and build towards the next LTP and further aligning the KPIs and the way they are measured to get them as useful as possible. We have implemented continuous surveying now for the residents survey, so that will mean that council will get regular results for that through the year. Then in terms of service performance areas of focus, I've just identified 3 that will be key focuses for the teams over the next year. The first of those is WasteNet and their focus on the waste minimisation plan. The second is building on the upward trend that we were seeing in the 4th quarter in terms of usage of public-facing facilities. So while the results as an overall don't look good, I think when you look at the 4th quarter results, you can really see the kind of the city coming out of that restriction period. And then the third notes that it has been a very sad year for road traffic accidents within the city, and that's really affected the roading KPIs. Council did implement the new speed limit review, so that will come into force in various periods over the next year and should have an impact. And then in terms of the financial performance areas of focus, obviously there was an impact on the budget in terms of when subsidies came through, which was much discussed as the annual plan was undertaken. There'll be a continued focus in 22-23 around revenue from fees and charges, which is still a little bit below where we would want it to be in terms of balancing up the types of revenue that are coming into council. Infrastructure and the Project Management Office are going to keep building on their good progress in terms of the capital program, and we're going to look, as I said, in terms of how we can better use information to help all the teams across council in their day-to-day delivery.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Look, I'm conscious that you quite rightly pointed this gone to PPP. So, Darren, I just wonder whether there's any comments from the PPP discussion, bearing our role as risk and assurance rather than your policy work. Is there anything from PPP you'd like to say about the report at this stage before I?
No, we just noted that whilst it is the final quarter, there are still figures that are being compiled for the annual report. So
yes, yeah.
Still
always happens that way. Some measures can't be done until post balance date. I get that. Yes. Right, are there questions folk would like to raise? Yes, Ian.
Look, I must comment on the WasteNet. We'll be focusing on the implementation of the WMMP. Now, there's quite a few things that make this a complete misstatement. WasteNet hasn't met since June 2020. So that is a risk in itself, to have a joint committee with so much responsibility that's gone to sort of a hiatus, or it's just gone. I don't know what's happened to it. And then the waste minimisation plan that was supposedly created in June 2020 is non-compliant with the Waste Minimisation Act because of its failure to consult under its guidelines. Now, the implementation of this act, if you read the forward written by WasteNet's chairperson in the new plan, supposedly new plan, it states that there's going to be a 2-year holding pattern. Now, if you get a plan that says there's a 2-year holding pattern, that's quite easy to implement, isn't it? You do nothing. So how can an organisation that hasn't met for 2 years implement something that isn't compliant and really has no substance to it? I'm sorry, but I'm pleased it's arrived at this committee because it is a huge risk. As we found out in our annual plan, our waste kilos per capita has risen from 650, which we're trying to reduce. I mean, it's called a minimisation plan. We seem to be operating under a maximisation plan. And we were given in the annual plan report reasons that weren't held together by a lot of accurate data about an increase of people making more waste. But surely over a 2-year period, we should be onto this. And yet this statement here I find completely wrong, and it shouldn't be here because WasteNet will not be doing anything.
Yes, Nubby.
just to reinforce that as well, I'm wondering whether we should be doing this as a local authority ourselves and not wanting WasteNet to do it, because, as Rangi quite rightly says, they haven't met for the best part of 18 months, 2 years. The contract we have with the recycling agency is driven by the city, even though one of the other councils does have a supplementary contract with us, not the provider. And I just think the mechanism of using WasteNet will not get us where we need to be. It's long overdue, and I think we should, as a city, just get on and do our own plan. And if others then want to adopt it or align with it, that's fine. But just to sit in a system that's clearly not working is not a way forward on what is a very important issue. Now, I accept that the government view on WasteNet is a moving feast from 1 month to the next. I mean, you get this rush of blood, and we're going to have recycling of glass bottles, but then there's a hiatus, and you hear nothing forever while they trial it somewhere. So that's one issue. And the other issue for me is more a structural thing. And I noticed in one of the papers that we're going to deal with as we go forward in today's agenda, there is a time framework for early in the next triennium for the new council to discuss the scope or focus of the Risk and Assurance Committee. And I guess just an observation for me, depending on whether I'm here or not here at the end of October, is that I see the amount of work coming into this committee to be very extensive. It's grown over time, and I wonder whether we need to reflect, like this report, for argument's sake, already been to PPP. And I think in an ideal world, its next port of call would have been full council just to adopt. But it seems that we go to PPP, we come out here, because you could argue everything we do in council has a risk at one level, and then it goes on to full council like there's 3 bites of the cherry in some ways. And I just wonder that it would be helpful to have some work before we get to that scoping exercise in the next triennium, to have some benchmarking of what really needs to come to this committee, and what could, under a risk model, be going somewhere else. And it's a much
Thanks for that advice,
question.
Yep, and I appreciate that. So a couple of questions have been raised. Rena, I don't know whether you or one of your colleagues could help you. So I guess the question that I've heard from Ian is actually, so how does this get acted on? We've identified a need, and I think, Ian, if I could say it properly, you're saying there's a need because WasteNet's not meeting, and the waste minimisation plan has its challenges. I think that's probably then appropriate, and says, well, we've got to focus on this for next year. I wonder if there's anything you could add that would help us understand more some of the challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. The Waste Advisory Group did meet earlier this year, back in April, and they discussed a number of factors which we need to take into account as a council. We are currently looking at the Waste Minimisation Management Plan itself, and we have engaged with the Ministry for the Environment on the procedure matters that the councillor has raised, and we will be bringing back a report to the Infrastructure Services Committee on their assessment of our process back in 2020.
Thank you. So obviously more to work on there, and I hope that is, I mean, it's an indicative of a process. That's not necessarily the answer you're after, but at least there's a process in place to actually deal with what you've characterised as a risk, which I think's important.
Well, what I see is a massive failure, and this committee is about dealing with failures, and it's a failure that I don't believe should have occurred, because you've got an act that guides you through all the processes. So it shows that the joint committee, is it the problem of having a joint committee? No one takes responsibility, and these are the things that happen because of that. It's a critical thing. It's impacted on us by over 800,000 at the last annual plan, and put a rates rise up. We did not know about this until the last minute, that these figures had been suddenly escalated. So, yeah, to me, we're going to do something really doesn't cut the mustard, because there is no evidence. I don't see anything that points me, especially as chairman of infrastructure, that anything will happen. Sorry, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. As chairman, I haven't been involved. I believe that I thought this would have come at a level where I may have been involved, but I haven't. And I've sat back and watched this unfold. It's very frustrating.
Well, look, I think all we can do is note your frustrations here. I've got good advice here about a process to follow forward. I suspect as Chair of Infrastructure that will be something that you will be
Current
keen
Chair of Infrastructure.
Well, a couple of months to go, Ian, don't worry. I hear that point. So I think your concerns have been expressed, and I think it isn't irrelevant. Sorry, I think it is relevant to raise them here in terms of risk. Have we got a challenge here? And thank you, Rhiannon, for raising it. I get that. Appreciate that. Nobby, you also raised the issue of the scope of this committee, and I think that's always good at the end of each triennium to reflect on the scope of the committee. So I would absolutely endorse your comments as far as that's concerned. Are there any other comments people would like to raise for Rhiannon's report? I've got a couple of questions, Rhiannon, if that's okay, please, which is useful. I was very grateful to get the expanded sense of what you're doing in terms of the improvement process around it. And look, I just want to encourage you guys as you do that. That's great to hear that there's a level of recognition about the need to continuously improve in terms of our reporting. Can you just give me any sense about the new methodology, though, that you've introduced for satisfaction KPIs? And I raise that because for me, it's also related to our Working Together initiative, where you'll recall when we concluded that we know that internally processes have improved, we've got the right sort of culture, there are problems with the rest of the community catching up with us. So I'm interested in how the new methodology may or may not help us with that.
So the main shift is twofold. So it's around when we're surveying and how we're surveying. So previously there's been a survey once a triennium in support of the long-term plan development, which looked at levels of service and what the community wanted in terms of levels of service. So now we are introducing satisfaction KPIs and measuring them more frequently. That is now happening basically continuously but reported quarterly, and then they will build to a statistically sound sample by the end of the year. So there will be some ups and downs as we go through the year. We have moved from a primarily telephone-based survey to a primarily online survey. So it's not wholly online, it is supported by street surveying and phone surveying to fill gaps. So you still come up with a statistically sound sample, but it is a normal found kind of process that when you move from a primarily phone-based survey to an online one, satisfaction levels, if you're monitoring KPIs across those things, they dip because people are more negative when they're not speaking to an actual human being. So that is something that needs to be taken into account in terms of these results. And I think also just being aware that obviously the types of thoughts that people have when responding to a survey very much depends on what they're experiencing at that time, which is another reason we've moved to continuous, to try to remove blips around things as simple as weather and just what is in the media at one point in time, but there is no perfect methodology.
Yeah. So you're balancing up frequency and ability to remove the gee whiz, I didn't get enough sleep last night sort of type thing, along with the fact that online people can tend to I presume that's scientifically proved, be more negative. So I hear your point. So, but equally, I think it probably makes sense. So that's useful. Thank you for that. I did have one question, and I asked this, Ian, conscious that we already talked about what goes to other committees. On page 28, it says so this was recognised in the 70% achievement. Don't know whether 70% out of 100 is good or bad. I think it's good. I think particularly when you start to look at the quantum of capital delivered as in contrast to where we've been in the past, that's superb. The last sentence says the 3 Waters Pipe capital renewal programs were each underspent for the year due to contractor availability and will be managed within the future continuous program. I get the general gist of that. I wanted to ask a question. Is this a red flag of what we perceive as potential ongoing difficulty in finishing our renewal program, or is it something that we, it's crystal ball gazing that might just be a blip at the moment? I'm again looking down the line. That may not be your question, Rhiannon, but I just wonder if I could raise that. As I say, is this something that we should be concerned about, or do we see this as being a matter that is somewhat temporary?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Look, our team are very mindful of the planning and the delivery on the current conditions in the market, and are certainly engaging with the contractors through the range of agreements we have. They are building in a slightly bigger program to foreshadow any supply chain issues or any other market-driven issues which mean that they can't deliver as per program. So we're confident this number will grow in terms of performance against target budget in the coming year, and they are mitigating as much as they can within their powers to make sure we're delivering on the targets. Michael, do you want to add anything?
Thank you. Given we're doing a joint role in relation to covering off the infrastructure, there's a mix in relation to the renewals programs just at the moment. What I'd like to highlight to the committee is we've actually got more contracts engaged in relation to our renewals program at this time of the year than any other year that we've had. So we've learnt from the past, and we've actually been addressing as we've moved forward in the last year. So we've now got to a place where we've got earlier contract involvement, and we're into the market early in the financial year. So we're more confident of the delivery over the course of this year than we have been in others.
Great. Okay, so that's an improvement. So I won't take that as a flag, but it's something, Steve and Michael, that actually, from if there's a valid role for us to be dipping our toes into the water, it's actually, pun intended, it's the sort of stuff that we are maintaining. Things like our maintenance programs, which if they fall over, they come back and bite you later in future generations, not necessarily next year. Novi.
Just a couple of reflections on that. It doesn't bode well for the new water entities that are coming in 2 years from now, that we can't get work done because of contractor availability. That's one of the red flags that we've floated with the DIA and just seems to fall on deaf ears. The other observation I've got is more of a generic one around what other councils are doing. Some are just doing business as usual, and that's my view of what we're doing here. We're trying to do what we would normally do regardless of Three Waters or the Three Waters reform. Some other ones are reducing and saying, well, why would I put the money in now? Let the entity put it in at a later stage, and there's a risk, as we've heard, if contractors are not available, they may miss out on investment in the short to medium term. Other councils, and some are close to here, are pouring money into the Three Waters area on the assumption that whatever debt they're drawing up now will be taken over by the entity. But of course, the politics of that is if the government changes and there's a wind back on Three Waters, they're left with a huge debt, even though they do have improved infrastructure. So it seems as though we're doing the right thing. DIA have said that they are watching for those ebbs and flows to make sure that people aren't going to either end of the spectrum.
Yes, there's certainly uncertain times in that sense. So I hear your point about endorsement, that we carry on with normal work. That's why I raised my question about how's the renewal program going. Yes, Michael. Sorry, could I just? Do you want to respond to that, because I've got Leslie with a question as well.
Yes.
Oh, go for it, Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, just wanted to highlight the Councillor's concern in relation to the renewals program on funding side of it, and highlight the borrowing side. Our renewals program is rates funding, but there is an opportunity with the Three Waters, if we could accelerate the program, to change that to borrowing, which I know other councils have sought. And if we had the suppliers available, that is something we could bring to the Infrastructure Committee at a later date.
Thank you. Yes, Novi?
Just in relation to Michael's response there, I think that's an avenue or an opportunity for us. One of the things that continues to worry me is our alternative water supply. I know we're doing work in that area, but it is still a very big risk for the city that our only supply of water is the Riki River. If that was compromised, we're in big trouble. So advancing that, to me, it has to be a priority. It worries me that once we get into the new entity, it will not be a high priority for the new entity. It has pressures elsewhere.
Appreciate there's a level of strategy here, which is useful. It's prompted, I'm glad to say, from a good question that's come out of the Risk Committee, Michael. So it is something that we should follow through on. I think it's clear on that, and I actually hear from you that we are following through on, which is also comforting. Leslie, thank you for your patience.
Mr. Chair. Also, page 28, as it happens.
All right.
Just the comment there that the Anderson House project has been completed in July 2022. Due to some current or some recent media comment, I just wondered if we could ask Mr. Gibling to expand on what has been completed and what we are now waiting on.
Through the chair, it's Richard here, Leslie. Anderson House, the capital project has come to a completion. There's just a few minor defects to work through, but that it's the capital aspect that is completed. The next phase is opening up to the public via the trust and the negotiations with the agreement with the trust, and also the leasing arrangement that we'll have. So that's the next steps.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you. I had a couple of observations, Michael, around finance, but we get to that later on when we get to the Treasury Management Report, so that's I'll leave that for that. Are there any other questions folk would like to raise with the assembled team? There being none, I wonder if we could just move to the resolutions, please, which is that we receive the report, we note the report to the PPP, and the fourth quarter, including the fourth quarter performance report, and we note the progress on the approach to continuous improvement of the performance management and reporting, as Rhiannon has discussed with us this morning. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you, Rhiannon. Appreciate that. Right. We could move to confirmation of the internal audit plan. Peter, welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chair, morning, councillors. Just like to make some comments on the Appendix A. While it's heavy focus on food regulations and building regulations, this is to keep us on track to retain our accreditation in those areas. Each year we do receive a number of requests from teams across council for additional reviews and audits. An example would be we're just completing a audit of our rates rebate process to ensure we're following the process and ensure that those entitled actually get the rebate. Additionally, we've just completing a review of our governance reports and the process for those to try and improve the timeliness of the reports coming through so that we can actually monitor what stage they are at. So there is additional reports apart from those that are in this report here.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. That's a very good context. I was interested in, as you say, a regulation-heavy internal audit Appendix A, which is good. We've also got the broader internal audit stuff. I wonder, Michael, is there any comment you wanted to make, or on the other table, which is the proposed internal audit program through Deloitte?
Yes, through yourself, Chair. Just like to highlight we do have a procurement review, but scheduled for 23-24, and I'll talk to that. There's an item in PE item 6 where I'll talk about where we've got to in relation to our procurement processes, etc. And while that, and the reason behind that scheduling in 23-24 fits in with our timeline in relation to that. So just want to highlight that one.
So I think this is we had a I think this is an important point. We don't want to dwell long on it as a committee, but important for the committee just to reflect. This is our chance to influence, making certain that we, I'm trying to look at an analogy. We have a clean nose. This is our chance. This is our chance to look and see, in fact, getting staff, Peter's team, or indeed Deloitte's, we spend a fair bit of money with, to focus on things that really count, that we need to know and have the assurance management have control over. And obviously, Peter, at some stage, Jack, we get a summary of your reports coming back, which is really important. So it's quite critical that we look at this. We talk about risk on one side, but our role is risk and assurance. This is a big part of our assurance, along with our friends from external audit. So are there any other comments people would like to raise? Yes, Nobby.
Two issues. In the original recommendations, it talks about adopting the proposed Deloitte's review in Table 1. I can't see that anywhere.
Sorry, you can't see...
Well, I can't see any Deloitte's report in
page
mind.
93 of your agenda, in diligence box or board box, what do we call it?
Well, that's just our proposed. Oh, you're saying that the review at the top is.
Yes, that's the proposed program that we would ask Deloitte to do over the coming 3 years.
That's fine. The other issue is the issue of the procurement review, which is one of the last reviews to be done in year 23-24, and given what we have in report coming forward in PE today, I just wonder whether that's an area that we might want to reconsider.
Good call. Michael.
Yes, through yourself, Chair. Just want to step council through why while the timing is late, what leads into that, and why we're looking at 23-24. So I'm happy to step us through that to explain why that's there and not brought forward any earlier. We've history of this is we had procurement guidelines in place in prior to about 2 years ago, and we decided that we wanted to put a full policy into a full procurement policy review. We've only recently had that policy in place for just over 9 to 10 months. That new policy that now in place, we are trying to educate and train the organisation in the new ways. That is a big culture shift from an organisational point of view. And we're at a stage where we want to actually move that to a compliance checking ourselves. So at the moment, the resourcing that I have available in this space is to focus in on the big and large tendering documents and support those. We don't have the ability within the team at this stage to actually get into the lower level, and that bracket is around the 250 bracket. So we're focused on trying to get compliance requirements at the contracts above that initially. I would like to have a compliance regime in place, and we're working through that at the moment, how we could achieve that. It is resource constrained in relation to that. What I would like to do is have that compliance work and our regime in place so we can give the committee confidence and the council confidence that we have got our compliance, the culture shift, and we can hold our heads up that we've got the regulations in place and the policies in place that will meet the needs of this organisation. To do one while we haven't got any of our compliance reporting in place means that they're not doing a review of how we're doing the process. They're doing a complete review. That would be money not well spent because we already know what we need to improve on. As I mentioned before, the only constraint on doing it faster is the fact that we are resource constrained in relation to that. It would be, we've got one resource focused on our contract side of it at the moment, and they're heavily focused on getting our tendering documents in relation to large contracts in place.
So just to interpret, 250 by the way, under $250,000.
It's 250,000 and above.
Yeah, so $250,000 and above, you're confident that the process, or you're developing from a compliance perspective, from a perspective of covering good practice, that's where your focus is at the moment, but you're acknowledging that with, I think you say resource constrained, that seems to me like a lack of resource. You're constrained to the level of work you can do it at this stage in contracts that are under $250,000. Great. I suspect we may come back to that when we look at item 6 in the PX agenda, but there goes. Thank you for that contextual advice. Yes, Ian.
Just following on along this topic, procurement.govt.nz, they outline sort of mandated guidelines and the recommended guidelines, and also if you go to OAG, they've done reports 2008, 2009. This information, is that a useful tool that you can fall back to as something? I mean, I've read all through it and it's quite comprehensive, and it's sort of like a step by step, you know, before you do each action. It's sort of like just a simple checklist. Is that useful, or do we abide by that, or is that something? And the other question I've got is our delegation register still the 2020 delegation register, is that still in action?
Through yourself, Chair, I'll address the last one first because it's the easiest one. Yes, the delegation register is in place and is in practice. The other one, which is the use of those procurement, those guidelines were the guidelines that we were using prior to putting in our own council policy. It would be fair to say our council policy goes into more detail, and we have a framework that's attached to that. It's the framework that we need to roll out and make sure people are now following and adhering to the new framework. So we've gone further than what's in that procurement, as we've discussed with council in previous sessions, that the new policy is a step further than what's on those guidelines.
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage? Nobby, just one thought from me, which is, I said it wrong, this is a 3-year forward rolling program for the internal audit. That table, it's not. It's actually really there in effect now, given we're at the end of 21 and 22. It's effectively the next 2 years. So we're 12 months out from the procurement review it's anticipated. So there's a target there for Michael and the team to fill the gaps so that we can actually have an external confirmation that's right. Okay, any other points people like to raise? Being none, I'd like to move to the recommendations, which is that we receive the report, we receive and endorse the draft internal plan. So that's both the internal audit one for Deloitte's, and it's also Peter's extensive and detailed Appendix A, which is great to see. Sorry, I've actually covered those off, haven't I? Sorry, 2 and 3. We're endorsing both of those. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this, please? Thank you, Ross. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Ian, was it your hand up?
Yeah.
I think it was. Thank you. Any discussion on the motions? Being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Thank you, Michael, for your input. Right, financial risks. Good morning, Patricia. Welcome.
Morning, everyone.
In your hands, Patricia.
Okay, I'll step through this because there's a lot of information in the Treasury report for this quarter. We have found that the markets are continuing to move. This was written, so the Treasury report attached was written at 30 June. It's continued to move. We are seeing interest rates increase again, with the central bank increasing the cash rate again, which will cause some pressure going forward. We continue to have the policy breach. If we get to 150 million of borrowing in 25-26, it's a technical breach at this point. We are closely looking at it. In the next lot of borrowing, we do have quite a bit of borrowing coming up for renewal in October. So we will look to whether we can fix that at that point in time. The market changes have resulted in an average interest rate going higher than what it was previously. We've had one of the lowest average interest borrowing rates in the country from any council. That has gone up, and we will have to review our assumptions for the 23-24 annual plan. It's very clear at this point. The other point that I want to note is we've provided a brief summary on the loan that we've provided to ICL, the development loan. That, including the balance at year end, it was we had lent 12.8 million. That's currently up to, as of last week, 15.15 million. But we are earning a commercial interest rate on that investment. In relation to our rates, our other debt, that is being managed very closely. We do always expect to see a slight upturn at 30 June as all the invoicing gets done. And the rates debt is the same. The significant increase at August is because all the unpaid rates from the 21-22 year has become arrears. So that's 1.7 million. But we have seen that come down already. So as people have received their instalment notices for the first instalment, they've realised that there's an arrears amount, and we're seeing that come down, or we're getting payment plans put in place. from that, were all the points that I wanted to cover. Any questions from yourself?
Thanks, Patricia. Appreciate that. Again, I suspect I should offer you, Darren, a chance because I think this has probably come through your committee, correct? Is there anything that you want to raise at this stage?
Nothing at the moment, Chair.
Okay, is there questions that folk would like to raise? Yes, Nobby.
Just more of a reflection, really. Patricia's raised this issue before about the $150 million limit, or the cap that we've imposed internally. I just wonder whether, as a council, we need to review that, because that was set at a time when the ceiling for local government funding agency was twice your income. So we had a potential then to borrow up to 200 million, and a few years ago we set that limit at the 3/4 level, which is 150. Of course, the limits now are 3 times your income, which is about 350 by my assessment, which is significantly up. And I wonder whether that limit that we've got should, which is an internal limit, should be reviewed and pushed upwards, which would ease the pressure that the finance people are always trying to keep within it. That doesn't mean that we just go out and recklessly borrow another 50 or 100 million. I'm not suggesting that, but it would take the pressure off what appears to many to be a limit that we can't bypass or that we constantly need to report on.
Patricia or Michael, would you have any comments you care to make at this stage about the review of the debt ceiling?
The 150 million, I just want to clarify something from Councillor Clark. The 150 million isn't actually the debt ceiling. That's where we think in 25-26 our borrowing will be at.
Sure.
The policy limits are set as a percentage of our expected borrowing going forward. So this borrowing also assumes that we have got 3 waters in there as well. So we do need to do a lot of work in relation to what the borrowing may look like post the 3 waters.
Yes. Okay, Nobby?
Just as a reflection of that, people that do troll over our reports, and we do have some externally, they keep seeing this concern that we're going to breach the 150 limit, as though that we're being a little bit reckless in some ways or getting ahead of ourselves, and that's not the case. We're a very conservative council, and our net debt is probably better than most councils, or certainly the majority. And I just wonder whether we should do a little one-off exercise to gaze at whether that's still an appropriate level, because it's only set internally. It's not an external limit, but that's okay.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that advice about potentially public perception about our debt position. And I take your point, Nobby, and it's clear from the Bancorp report that we are, I don't know whether it's conservative, but we are in a good position with one of the currently lowest rates, but I think you well signalled, and we all, it would be difficult not to recognise that rate will go up. Ian, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's regarding the comments around the upcoming annual plan, the impact on interest rates, and then more, I guess at a high level, the long-term plan and the projects happening there. So obviously, how soon will we know how off skew are we going to be with our long-term plan with this obviously 4.26% come June 2027, and when, because obviously, do we carry on blindly towards the cliff and just say that's part of life, interest rates, or do we say we have the ability now to shape our own destiny by perhaps looking at certain projects that may seem a bit futile, like Streetscape Stage 2. It's not the end of the world, and that allows us to carry on with the more significant projects like the museum and the Branks home and stuff like that. And when are we going to know or sit down and actually punch in the numbers that'll, rather than obviously at the last annual plan we suddenly arrive and go boom, 7 point something percent that ended up down at 6.8, and we missed the 4% by a mile. Currently we're looking at a 4% at this current next rates increase at 4, and so on and so on and so on, and then the last 3 years dropped down to 3. When are we going to, I guess the early knowledge is important to me, that we're either, yeah, no, she's all good, or we've got some issues coming, and doing it in the month of June to me doesn't feel right.
Yes, Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, I'll ask two of my colleagues to give you an indication of timeline, etc. One being Patricia about the finance and also economics. I'll get Rhiannon to give you some insight. Just before they do, though, I would also highlight there's a lot of uncertainty in relation to what we're doing for the Three Waters and what the financing of that is and what the impact on our debt will be. There could be some choices for this council to make as that Three Waters' bill comes through in relation to how we manage our finances. That will have a significant impact in the annual plan in relation to what our forward debt projections are going to be. Having said that, I will pass on to, in the first instance, because it's timeline, I'll pass on to Rhiannon if she can give you about timeline indication.
So in terms of the annual plan and the long-term plan timeline and assumptions, we are very conscious of the volatility in the environment at the moment in terms of inflation and interest rates, but also population with the impacts that the closed borders have had. So you'll recall at the last risk assurance meeting, the report that we had commissioned by Invercargill. So we will be getting an update of that, and Council will get an update on that in November as we work on planning towards the annual plan and the long-term plan, and we have begun scheduling when those discussions around key projects will happen within that context so that you will get the information that you need to make the decisions for both the annual plan and the long-term plan.
I guess my worry is that in this just recent annual plan, we had, we set the LTP and first year into it, we blow the interest rates by 70%. We're at 6.8. We tell the public 4. We've told the public it's going to be 4 this coming rates increase. And yet out of the blue, last annual plan, we had the solid waste increases. We had wage parity, living wage increases, all sorts of stuff that just appeared at the last minute. And here we are, as governance trying to deal with this. Yet I would like these things flushed out much earlier, including interest rate impacts and project. Stage 2, for example, of streetscapes, even though it's been okayed by council, has not been allocated in the long-term plan for any funding. So I'm just weary that I don't want to go through what we went through in June this year. It's very uncomfortable, and to me, I see it as unprofessional from a governance point of view.
Through yourself, Chair, if I could just get Patricia to respond in relation to where we currently are from the financing side of it and what the current model was.
So at present, we're just preparing the packs to go out to the teams to start the budget process. So we will start the budget process. We always budget for at least 3 years going forward. So they're having to do some crystal ball gazing of themselves about what things will look like at 1 July next year. And our hope is that when the November update to council, we will also be able to give you a headline about where the numbers are looking at.
Okay, so what would be the trigger point for us to go, our long-term plan is too ambitious, we need to relook at it seriously and go, fair enough, back then seemed plausible, but there's been changes. Rather than flogging a dead horse, when do we actually go, we need to actually have another go at this?
Sure, yeah. You want to go, stressing here
I'm
that
looking
you're
over to
risking
Rhiannon.
an amendment to the long-term plan.
Well, an amendment to the long-term plan 1 year out from when we're going to be redoing the long-term plan would be not advisable.
I think, look, the bottom line is that you are now entering the process. We have a number of things that are going to come together in this Q1 and Q2 of this financial, it's really Q2, which is we're going to get our draft annual results next month, right? Well, we know it's coming up on the work program. You're going to start getting your budget numbers coming in. You're getting the higher level financial strategy challenges of contract, the state of the contractor market, your contract rates, your interest rates, debt levels, they're all starting to come together now in this coming quarter. So rather than saying that suddenly gives rise to a change or not, you need that information, don't you, to be able to credibly financially plan and make the sorts of assessments that you're calling for, Ian, I think is really the point that we're making. So the critical thing is, Michael and Patricia and Rhiannon, that started and it's going to come together somewhere in this Q2, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, rightio. That's where it's at, Ian. I wonder, I've got Darren and then Leslie.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think it's a little rich to be accusing staff of not informing us of some of the potential, because when we went through the long-term plan process, they were very clear in pointing out to us that it was an ambitious long-term plan, particularly since we were going into some of the largest annual budgets for capital expenditure that we've done. The variations are significant. There's absolutely no question about that. But the ongoing effects of the pandemic on the construction industry and the supply for the construction industry and the effect on infrastructural work as well is well documented. And for at least the last 4 to 5 years, whilst the country has enjoyed very low interest rates, staff have continuously warned us of the chance for that to change, and that's generally as a result of what's going on geopolitically, and the effects that would have. That's being realised. You cannot say that it wasn't signalled.
Thank you, Darren. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darren said it. I'm not going to repeat it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. This raises the really important point, and you know, I appreciate the stuff that you raised. This raises the importance of us keeping our focus in the right area of the financial strategy, because actually that's what we're talking about. So that's good. So I think I saw Nobby first go, then Ian, you've got after you.
Sure. I just want to reinforce what Rangi's been saying. And I'm only a first-term councillor, so I'm open to being wrong on this issue, but I don't see anything that prevents an incoming council to pause any project they want to. They'll be held accountable with the community for doing so. The long-term plan does not lock us into a schedule that we subsequently find is unsuitable. So for argument's sake, we could pause or cancel stage 2 of streetscapes. We could pause the investment in years 2 and 3 into this building. We could reschedule the time framing of the museum and so on. There's nothing to prevent that. We don't have to wait to the middle year of every triennium to review the long-term plan. I think councils have a mandate, given the volatility of what's in front of us, to do that. And I support his view that we can't just continue to go on the way we're going on and then end up next year saying, oh, sorry, it's not 4%, it's 6.5% or 7% again, because that has a compounding impact that just is a legacy for the future. So I think we need to have a review process, which is not talking about which projects or the nuts and bolts of what the staff are doing. Their advice is valuable, but it's a matter that an incoming council can change the direction, I guess, of where they want to go on some of these projects.
Thank you, Nobby. Ian, final say.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure if I'm suffering from my head injury or not, because I asked a simple question on Tuesday and failed to receive a relative simple answer. And today I asked a question on what would be the trigger point to, the threshold to relook at the long-term plan. I thought that was a reasonable question. And the fact that the comment that it's Rich asking that question, I feel from the chair of PPP is either I don't understand what
Chairman, I didn't say that was Rich asking the question. I said it was Rich criticising staff.
Can I just suggest that we stay on topic here, please?
Okay, so the question...
The issue is, and Ian, I've tried to deal faithfully with your question, when does the trigger occur? And that's why I tried to sum up by saying the trigger occurs when we have the information.
Right, and it wasn't a criticism of staff.
No.
It was obviously there comes a point where combined factors out of our influence go look, what you did back then in 2021 can no longer work. And that is the timing of that trigger for us in governance to be able to use the tools and decision-making processes that we have available. And I thought that's a reasonable question, but next time I've got some more questions here later on, I might review those.
Let's keep it at the principal level. The question that you've asked, I think the critical answer is we have from staff the process, which unfortunately is the way in which the council will have to work this one through. The critical thing is clearly the information that will be coming together within the next quarter, which is going to determine the nature of, quite frankly, the probable recommendations you leave for a new or incoming council. In terms of actually, does a trigger get triggered or have to be pulled or whatever is the right analogy? Are there any other questions that people would like to raise, Patricia, particularly around the report? Can we move to the recommendations, please? And that we received the report, that's fine. Secondly, we note the debt position, which is both at a gross level, $100.8 million, and also the net debt balance of 43.3, which of course is the critical one from our rating agency's perspective. Important for us to note, B, that we commenced, I think, this resolution at our last meeting in June, which is just recognising that we are monitoring the fact that if, in terms of our treasury management limits, the nature of our hedging cover that's converting debt from floating to fixed rate is at this stage in breach of our policy, as we anticipate in years 2 to 4. But we are agreeing here not to take any action because it's going to depend on I guess, a reassessment. Hello, quarter 2. We're talking. It's going to become pretty critical about the level of debt we actually have, because the level of debt will determine what the extent of that coverage is. We note that the current interest rate assumption for the current year, 22-23, is valid. So again, if we go back to the Treasury Management Report point, it's going to hit us when we have to roll our debt, and we've seen the profile on that. And we also note the outstanding debt on debt of all types continues to reduce. That's a very fulsome set of recommendations. There are none over the page. I don't think there are. Okay, I'll move from the chair that we adopt these all as a suite of resolutions. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Darren. Appreciate that. Then discussion on the motion. They are important motions. We are acknowledging a policy variation here. I just want to stress that. There being no debate. I'll put the motions then, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, we can move to the next item, which is our policy program. Welcome back, Rhiannon. A big list, as we saw last time.
Thank you, Chair. So this report deals with the policy program update. The only thing that I'll just really draw attention to is we have been focused, obviously, on the priority areas of bylaws, many of which have been due for review, or others which have needed review because of regulatory changes or changes in the operating environment. So we have had a very full program, so I'm really pleased with the progress that we have made. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Hayden, who has done an awesome job. He is leaving us in a month, so he can be very proud of the 6 bylaws that we have progressed.
Appreciate that, Rhiannon, and well done, Hayden. Yes, questions for Rhiannon at this stage? Seems like no. Oh, sorry, Darren. Were you?
Oh, no questions, Chair. I guess just to recognise the significant work we've done relatively late in the term with having to bring some of those policies and bylaws into alignment. When I looked at the number that we'd be adopting this month, I thought, well, that's going to be ambitious as we head into an election, but it's gone relatively smoothly. So I'm happy to move the 2 recommendations.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Ross. Just before I put the motion, just you raise a good point about thanking Hayden. But if we're losing Hayden, what's our capacity to keep the initiative of cleaning these up going on?
So luckily I have a new senior policy advisor starting the day that Hayden leaves, so that is fortuitous. But yes, we will need to progress replacing the policy advisor.
You've been hard on yourself. Well done. Good planning. That's good. That's great to hear that we can keep the initiative going. Okay, we have Darren and Ross moving the motion that we receive the report and note the policy schedule. Is there any discussion on the debate? Sorry, any discussion on the motions? Oh, gee whiz. I'll put the motion then, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. We can move then to the strategic projects program update. That would be great. Do I have a staff member speaking to me on this one? Michael, are you going to do the honours?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read. The key things I will highlight in relation to the report is we've got a number of our projects that are in flight at the moment. So we've got a lot of contracts out for tendering in relation to this, or in commitment from that perspective. Just wanted to highlight that because it does relate to close down any of those projects. We would need to welcome our
the cavalry's come over the ridge, mate. So well done.
Just to close out what I was saying, we would need to work through those because we'll have contractual commitments in relation to those projects and flight projects. I'll hand over to Lee.
Welcome, Lee. Morning. Just in time. It's superb timing.
So we get to watch the live stream.
If you're prepared to speak to your report, I'd appreciate that, please.
Yeah, look, I've no significant comments to make. I'm just open to ask any questions.
Right. Reflect the fact that again, this is for risk. We're a risk committee. We're looking at this from a high level, from a management and a control perspective, rather than the work that might be done by other committees. Do I have questions for Lee or indeed Michael at this stage? Right. Got a couple, if it's okay, Lee. The thing I noticed big from this report is obviously, I think the last time we saw was in June, and so now we've gone into the new year, and so I'm looking at the fee table or the schedule of costs on page 120. Obviously, things have been normalised. So yep. Things like the museum, decisions have been made at a policy level by council. Yep. What was previously shown as essentially an unbudgeted amount now has got itself in its place and position. Yep. We know we were running. Yep. Brilliant. Okay, that's good. And I think I've seen from elsewhere, well, in fact, from your comments, some action that is going. That leaves the CAB still with an outstanding $10 million question, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What does it take to solve that out of interest? Is that going to be through the next annual planning process or next LTP or something?
I think for us, it's about just working through the cost reports, working through scope, and just aligning them.
Yeah.
So that 26 million is sort of a concept financial review that says if you're going to do all this, this is likely what the costs are. Yeah. As a team now, we've got to work through and try and get back to our budget and look at what those scope changes would be. So it's at the moment it's really a bit of a what do we want to achieve, what's the cost impact, before we come back with some sort of options report. Very similar to the museum process in that sense.
So Lee, context for you, we've already been discussing sort of tangentially the city streets project.
Yep.
And I don't want a direct question to ask you a direct question around that. What I do want to ask you is the important one, because clearly you've noted that as red. Yep. So it's got its challenges, and I think I've picked up enough from today to note that I understand some of those. What I'm interested though is process and control, which is that you have said currently the delivery method is not working and a change in delivery mode is being considered. Could you just expand on that for me? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's it's the contract form. It's how we've structured the consultants in what order, who's leading design, who's leading different aspects of the work, how we actually do the work. Methodology, whether we do drainage first and get that out of the way before we do city streets, the streetscapes work. So I mean, looking at methodologies of really how we do this. Do we close the streets entirely? So there's some practical applications that we look at. And then obviously some contractual applications. Is this contract form worked? How that is structured really.
I take it from the pun intended staging of the streetscapes. We have no active contracts in place for the next stage. So we have this chance, or you're taking this chance to review the methodology, so that when you then go to market, you've got the better methodology in place.
Yeah, I think it's definitely looking at what's working well and what's not working well in stage one. Cherry picking what the good parts.
Yes.
And really analysing the stuff that's not working so well for us.
Great. And is that going to be a long process to arrive at a new methodology?
No. I mean, we've carried out quite a bit of work already, to be honest with you. We're continuing working, carrying out those workshops. So yeah, I would say by the end of this year, we'd have a very, very clear picture of the best way to go about that.
Brilliant. Well, your challenge is to make this document stay green as it looks like at the moment, which is always what most documents look like at the start of a financial year. So
yeah, I'm pleased to see
we'll look at it with interest as things go on. Are there any other questions at this stage for Lee? Yes, I've got Leslie, then Ian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just interested on page 120, Lee, the Housing Innovation Project. Can you just expand a wee bit on that? I see you've overcome some challenges around space planning and parking.
Yeah, so that project started off as Healthy Homes, where we were doing some upgrades around that.
Yeah, I thought we'd completed the
We have completed that. The second part of that is to developing new units. So we're looking at a couple of sites, and one particular site that we've got, we call it Site 1. We had some issues around trying to fit the right number of units on that. We had some parking compliance issues. We had to try and fit parking in, and we've pretty much overcome that. Bit of rejigging where the units would sit, and I took a transport or traffic review of that to get over that too.
Great, that is indeed groundbreaking stuff.
Thank you. No, it's exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Ian?
Right, from a governance point of view regarding the CAB project, now, are we just currently looking at the figures? Obviously, we started at 8.3 and now there is talk of 26, but obviously you've said that scope needs to be adjusted, but that is purely to do with the refurbishment of this current building, the building we're in?
Correct. Yeah.
And no work has yet been undertaken on what would be the tipping point where you would go, nah, to achieve what we want, we need to abandon this building and look at something new and look at the options around the benefits that may have and all that. You completely jump to a different line of track. So when is that going to happen, or you're nowhere near that yet?
Yeah, we're nowhere near that yet. I think stage one is about really understanding exactly what we want, and what we've got, and then what we want. And I think we're very close to understand. Well, we do know what we've got, and now we're really trying to align what we want to achieve with A, the budget, or B, what an alternative option might look like.
Right. When would you seek feedback from governance on that actual expenditure and budgeting and the options around? I mean, we had the museum options. We had, fixing up the old museum. That was one of the options, and then we had the other options of rebuilding. A couple of options. So, is it going to go that way?
I think for us, our milestone program, I think it's April or May for bringing an options report back to council.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Do I have any other questions? Sorry. Nobby.
Just on the issue of the housing innovation. So is this project implemented by the recent decisions that we made around the 5.7 million government funding, which we initially thought would go towards a new museum, but after consultation with Mana Whenua, it was decided that 2 of the 5.7 million would go to improvements in this sector? Is that part of the thinking going forward, or is that yet to be decided on?
Through yourself, Chair, I can cover that one off. Both projects are separate from that perspective. Okay. It's an additional amount. This was the one where we put forward to improve our housing stock in relation to the long-term plan through the rental changes.
Thank you. Right, very useful discussion. Appreciate that. I want to just move to the motion, unless there are, I don't think there are any other questions, which is that we receive the report. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Ian. Any discussion on the motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against is carried. Thank you, Lee. Appreciate your effort being here. It's great. And Michael, for your short coverage. Can we now move then, please, to the actual work program as we look forward a wee bit. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Through yourself, Chair. I will take the report as read. It is a program that is very much in line with last year's program from that perspective. A few minor changes in relation to some of the timing, noting that August is normally when we do our annual plan program sequencing, and you'll see that in the program report as it's laid out. This year, I would note that we've got the September and December 22 calendar meeting schedules in there that have got dates that have now changed a little bit because we have sequenced reports to come forward into the August meeting, which would normally not be in that meeting. I've not reflected those changes in this work plan because this work program is the approved work program from last year and those two green columns. So the forward work program is very much in line with ongoing work program.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any questions that people like to raise with Michael? Sorry. No, there aren't. No, it looks like you really
I was just going to move the recommendation.
Oh, thank you.
On the premise of my previous comments that in December 2022, which is after the current election, we will have confirmation of terms and reference for this committee. I think that's an important piece of work.
Yeah. Nobby, just on that, I was reflecting, I have asked that we do a short survey, and I think it's out, isn't it, on this committee. Yeah. And I know I've filled mine out, I think I'm glad to say. Hopefully, I don't want to encourage those of you who have been, all councillors should be circulated, indeed senior management, because I think that's a good set piece to then consider some of the questions you're raising. So I look forward to that chance, I guess, at the September meeting. The other thing, just note about the September meeting is that a central piece of that will be the receipt of the draft annual report and a consideration of what resolutions we could pass and leave for the incoming council, which is really important, given it's we know that our opinion won't and can't be signed off until about the 20th of December this year. Next year, that's a Freudian slip. I shouldn't joke. So they are a couple of key things. So with that, Nobby's moved. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Ian. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much for that, Michael, and it's good to keep a record like this going of what we do. We are at the point now where consideration of matters of urgent business. I've said nothing has been raised with me, so propose we move on. And as I think we're probably due a break, I would just like to go move this motion so that Malavika can do the right administrative stuff. Could we look to move, and I will move from the chair, that we move into public excluded for the reason for the items on A to J for the reasons that are outlined. Did you second that, Ian?
Yeah, I did.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Giving up on questions.
Those against, carried. Thank you for keeping me up to mark there.